At 83, sitting on this wooden porch that creaks with every move, looking out at the Blue Ridge Mountains as they turn orange with the sunset, I feel I have a confession to make. Not to a priest, not to God, but to myself, and maybe to anyone with the patience to listen to an old man who made the most common mistake in the world. For 50 years I shared the same bed with a woman, and yet I often felt alone. Not because Beatrice was absent. She was always there, breathing beside me, in her cotton nightgown with that scent of ivory soap. No, the loneliness came from somewhere else, from the void that's created when you enter a marriage for the wrong reasons, when you mistake vertigo for love, anxiety for connection. I was 22 when I met Beatrice. It was 1965, and I thought I owned the world in Charlotte. I worked by day at a hardware store on Tryon Street and studied accounting at night. I had big dreams and empty pockets, but that didn't matter. I was young, strong, invincible. It was at a holiday party at my cousin Gerald's house that I saw her for the first time. She walked in wearing a yellow dress and a smile that seemed to light up the room more than the lamps themselves. When our eyes met, I felt a punch to the gut. A short circuit in my brain. I couldn't eat that night, or sleep, or focus on my accounting books for weeks. Every time Beatrice sent me a little note, because back then not every house had a phone, I felt like my heart was going to leap out of my chest. Sundays in Freedom Park became my reason for living. Every accidental touch was pure electricity. Every laugh of hers was a drug. What I didn't know then, and only understood decades later, was that none of that was mature love. It was chemistry. It was my brain flooded with dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. It was nature, wise and merciless, creating a thick fog so that two people would unite before they realized the true weight of living together. I confused anxiety with passion, urgency with a deep connection. We dated for a short time. We never even had a serious argument. Everything was easy, light, perfect. My mother tried to warn me, "Arthur, you don't really know this girl. Why the rush?" But I was convinced I had found the meaning of my existence. We were married in less than a year, wrapped in the certainty that this overwhelming feeling would be eternal. The first few months were a dream. We rented a modest little apartment near downtown. We were poor, but we didn't care. Every morning was a celebration. Every night, a promise. I'd come home from work, and she would greet me with that smile, and I felt like I'd hit the jackpot. But then, about 2 years into the marriage, something changed. It was an ordinary morning. We were sitting at the breakfast table. She was serving toast with butter, and I was drinking my black coffee. And suddenly I realized my heart didn't race like it used to. The silence seemed longer, heavier. I watched Beatrice chewing, and the sound started to bother me. The way she obsessively organized the dishes, the way she insisted on certain opinions. The fog had lifted. In place of idealization, a real person appeared before me, with qualities, yes, but also with flaws, quirks, limitations. She chewed with her mouth slightly open. She snored softly. She repeated the same stories. She was stubborn to the point of being childish. I panicked. I believed the love was gone, that I had made an irreversible mistake. For the first 10 years of our marriage, I lived trying to recapture that initial feeling. I planned surprises, flowers from the farmer's market, walks in the park, love letters. I forced romantic gestures. I tried to recreate the butterflies in my stomach, the anticipation, the ecstasy. But the more I tried, the more frustrated I became. It was like trying to hold water in my hands. And the worst part, I started to blame her. Yes, I blamed Beatrice, as if she were the one who had changed. She seemed more tired, less excited. She complained about the bills, about the difficulty of stretching our money. She talked about curtains, pots and pans, medicine. Where was that girl in the yellow dress? Only much later did I understand that she was still exactly who she had always been. I was the one who had changed. I was finally seeing her without the chemical filter of infatuation. The real Beatrice had always been there, practical, worried, down to earth. I was the one who had turned her into a fantasy, and when the fantasy shattered, I felt betrayed by reality. In those first 10 years I lived resentfully, believing my marriage was a fraud. I saw couples who seemed happy and thought, why can they do it and I can't? At night, lying next to her, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if it would be like this forever. I even considered leaving, finding someone else who would make me feel alive again. But I didn't leave, and it wasn't out of virtue. It was out of fear, cowardice, social convention. So I stayed. But I stayed in the wrong way. My body was there, but my soul was absent, going through the motions, sharing a bed but not a life. What I didn't know was that Beatrice felt it all too. Years later, she would confess to me that she also noticed the change, that she also felt alone. But she had something I didn't: patience. The understanding that relationships aren't fireworks. They're embers that need to be tended. I closed out that first decade convinced that romantic love was a lie, an evolutionary trap. I saw my marriage as a social obligation, not a choice. Beatrice was my wife on paper, but not in my heart. I was profoundly mistaken, because the real marriage, the real love, hadn't even begun. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. We'll be right back. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. Real life knocked on our door without asking for permission. There were overdue bills, arguments about money that never seemed to be enough. The roof started leaking during summer thunderstorms, and we couldn't afford to fix it. Our youngest son, Danny, got sick with pneumonia and spent a week in the hospital. The sleepless nights, taking turns by his bedside, the fear clutching my chest every time he coughed. The fantasy of a marriage driven by constant emotion was replaced by a demanding routine, and it was then that I started to look around. My friend Joe Carter got divorced after 12 years. "We just don't feel anything anymore," he told me. "I found someone who makes me feel alive again." 6 months later, he was remarried. 2 years after that, he was divorced again. Same reason. My cousin Gerald was on his 3rd marriage, always starting over when the spark disappeared, always chasing the next dopamine rush, always disillusioned when the chemistry inevitably faded. I saw so many friends repeating the cycle, addicted to the initial phase, unable to understand that it was just the prologue, not the whole story. It was by watching these men that I began to think more deeply. Was the problem really the lack of passion? I started paying attention to my marriage in a different way, no longer looking for butterflies in my stomach, but observing what was really happening. And that's how I discovered the pillars that support a shared life. The first pillar was the ability to resolve conflicts. When you're dating, almost everything is light, but in a real marriage, character is revealed in disagreements. Beatrice and I argued about money, about how to raise the kids, about everything. I remember one particularly ugly fight about our oldest son's education. I wanted him to drop out of school to get a job. Beatrice insisted he needed to finish high school. We raised our voices. I said harsh things. She cried, called me a coward. I spent 2 nights sleeping in the hammock on the porch, but then she made coffee and asked me to talk. We sat down and really talked. No yelling, no accusations. We laid out our fears. We reached a compromise. We learned that winning an argument doesn't strengthen a marriage. What truly sustained our relationship was the ability to sit down, even when we were hurt, and talk. Not to attack each other's character, not to turn disagreements into humiliations. I discovered that this skill is worth more than any romantic declaration. The second pillar was shared values. Over the years, I realized that Beatrice and I had completely different tastes. She liked soap operas. I preferred the radio. She was a devout Catholic. I was an occasional churchgoer. But we agreed on what really mattered. Honesty. Neither of us ever lied about money. Loyalty. We were faithful to each other. Responsibility to our family. The children always came first. When your values are aligned, a couple walks in the same direction. Without that, every decision becomes a tug of war. The third pillar was respect. There were days, many days, when I didn't feel in love with Beatrice, days when exhaustion spoke louder, days when she got on my last nerve. There were moments when I looked at her and felt nothing but indifference. However, respect stopped me from saying words I would regret. It prevented momentary irritation from destroying something built over years. I never called her stupid, or ugly, or useless. I never ridiculed her fears, even when I wanted to. And she did the same for me. I realized that physical attraction changes, the body ages, but respect remained. And without respect, when youthful beauty fades, there's very little left. The fourth pillar was partnership in adversity. Life is a series of quiet battles. I lost my job at 45. Beatrice had a cyst that required surgery. Our son got in with a bad crowd. We had to sell the house. My father died. In each of these crises, I asked myself, who would I want by my side? Not someone who's fun at parties, but someone who can hold a flashlight while I'm changing a flat tire on a dark road. Someone who will stand firm when the world seems to be falling apart. And Beatrice always held the flashlight. When I lost my job, she hugged me and said, "It's going to be okay. We always figure things out." And we did. She saved money, took on cleaning jobs, and never once made me feel like less of a man. When she got sick, I was the one holding the flashlight. I took care of her, changed her bandages, and sat by her bed on painful nights. Over time, I understood that I had chosen someone who stayed. In the trenches, in the crossfire. That's the person you want by your side. Not the one who makes your heart race, but the one who remains when your heart is broken. Our relationship transformed. The intense passion gave way to a serene affection. Many nights were simple. Me reading a book, her doing a crossword puzzle. Few words, but a deep sense of tranquility. I discovered that the most enduring love isn't explosive. It's constant. It's knowing the other person is a witness to your story. As we grew older, desire lost its urgency, but companionship grew. We developed inside jokes, glances that needed no explanation. We built our own language. I realized I had stopped being just a husband and had become that woman's best friend. When Beatrice fell ill for the last time, at 74, there was no cure. She spent her final months at home, then in the hospital when the pain became unbearable. I went every day, sat by her bed and held her hand, which had become so thin, so fragile. One of the last nights she was awake, lucid. The hospital room seemed too small for so many memories. We didn't talk about trips or glamorous moments. She just squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you for staying." Staying. That word echoed louder than any passionate declaration from the past, because staying is a daily choice, not a fleeting feeling. She passed away 3 days later, peacefully. I was by her side. Today, at 83, sitting on this porch, looking at the empty chair, I miss her. But I have no regrets. My biggest mistake wasn't marrying Beatrice. It was believing for years that marriage was supposed to be a constant spectacle. I learned that what sustains a union isn't intensity, but the daily willingness to stay, to talk, to respect, to share the weight of life. I watch young people chasing intense emotions, always swiping from one relationship to the next when the novelty wears off. Addicted to the infatuation phase, unable to understand that it's just the starter fuel, not the engine that keeps a relationship running for decades. I wish they understood that a shared life is built behind the scenes, in the repeated tasks, in the comfortable silences. True intimacy isn't made of fireworks, but of constant presence. If I could go back to my 22-year-old self, I'd say, don't choose just with a racing heart. A racing heart is biology, not wisdom. Choose with a calm mind, too. Watch how she resolves conflicts. See if her values align with yours. Notice if she respects you when she's angry. Ask yourself, if life falls apart, who would I want holding the flashlight by my side? Don't just seek emotion. Emotion evaporates like water in the sun. Seek character, values, respect, the ability to face hardships side by side. Because in the end, when time takes its toll, what will remain won't be the intensity of those first electrifying months. What will remain is the memory of having stayed, and of having been someone worth staying for, next to someone who also stayed. I understand now that love is a feeling, but staying is a decision. Feelings vary. Decisions build stories. And a story is all we have. I look at the mountains turning purple. The day ends in peace. And that's what I learned. Peace, not the rush, not the anxiety, is the true goal. The peace of knowing I stayed, and that I was loved not in spite of my flaws, but with them. That is the greatest gift a human being can receive. That's what Beatrice gave me. That's what I tried to give her. In the end, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.